Thank you for choosing Talks News, your only source into a hopeful soul praying and wishing for sensible discussions around guns, mass shootings, and my greatest concern is that even with Sandy Hook happening years ago, I don't think we're going to have a sensible conversation around sensible gun reform, or maybe even quite possibly the culture that is the United States of America that continually leads fellow citizens to bring guns into these areas where guns are probably the least wanted and the least needed, such as grocery stores and spas, elementary schools, malls, concerts. The date is March 24th, 2021, and we begin with a POA, and it goes like this. I pledge allegiance to liberty and justice for all. Now, if you are not necessarily in the know of what's going on, just a week after Atlanta had some shootings, Boulder, Colorado had a shooting leaving 10 dead. It is not really, I think I've heard of four shootings happening just this month. One being in Chicago, one being in Bronx, New York, and the other being Atlanta. So that's we've got four total. And it seems only two of them really made national news, and we're going to use this opportunity to the conservatives are going to use this opportunity to hide the fact that, there's no mental health issue going on here, and it's mostly associated with the individual who probably shouldn't have had a gun in the first place, going out and ruining everyone's Second Amendment. Liberals are a little bit more focused on the idea of let's just not have guns at all, which both of these goals are a bit improbable and short-sighted. But we'll get into that a little bit later through, you guessed it, Ben Chaperone, one of my favorites, and another with the Louder Crowder, one of my least favorites. But I want to start with this article coming from The Hill, a little militia update here going on. Usually I do a militia watch update going over the week's news on Mondays, but The Hill dropped this saying prosecutors say Oath Keepers coordinated with Proud Boys ahead of Capitol riot. Prosecutors are alleging that the Oath Keepers militia group coordinated with the Proud Boys ahead of the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol. The allegation came in a court filing on Tuesday in which prosecutors were urging a D.C. federal court not to release alleged Oath Keeper Kelly Meggs from detention ahead of his trial. Prosecutors included redacted Facebook messages from Meggs coordinating with the Proud Boys ahead of a planned rally in D.C. on January 6th. A number of members of the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers have been indicted on conspiracy charges in connection with the riot, but the messages are the first showing that the groups might have worked together. And this is significant because a lot of the conservative media kind of played it off as just a disorganized people's movement, when I've stated multiple times on this podcast, it's very likely that, the mass numbers of regular civilians, not necessarily a part of any militia group or organization whatsoever, were able to actually mask most of them going into the Capitol, hiding a lot of the Proud Boys who did not wear their usual gear and insignia to the Capitol riot. So just throwing that out there. On December 19th, Meggs wrote that he organized an alliance between the Oath Keepers, the Florida Three Percenters group, and the Proud Boys, and that the groups have, quote unquote, decided to work together and shut this shit down. One Facebook chat dated December 22nd indicated that at least 50 to 100 Oath Keepers would be in D.C. In that chat, Meggs wrote that, quote, "We have made contact with the PB, and they always have a big group, force multiplier. unquote. Meggs also sent a message on December 25th about a provisions list for the riot, including mace, gas masks, batons, and armor. He also discussed communicating a plan with the Proud Boys. Quote, "You can hang with us. We will probably be guarding Redacted, that or someone during the day, but then at night we have orchestrated a plan with the Proud Boys," the message read. "I've been communicating with Redacted, the leader. We are going to march with them for a while, then fall to the back of the crowd and turn off. Then we will have the Proud Boys get in front of them. The cops will get between Antifa and Proud Boys." I don't think Antifa was there at all. "We will come behind Antifa and beat the hell out of them," unquote. More than 300 people have been charged in connection to the Capitol riot that resulted in 5 deaths. The first conspiracy charges relating to the Capitol riot were handed to the Oath Keepers in January. A grand jury indicted 4 members of the Proud Boys on conspiracy charges, according to court documents that were unsealed Friday. So, very likely that many groups that were there that day were coordinating with each other while also, at the time of the event, also probably swapping contact info. So there's a little quick Militia Watch update since, on top of all of this gun reform talk, it's another facet of America that we ignore, which is that militarized citizens with extremist beliefs. So, moving on from that wonderful, wonderful, juicy news. Gotta love the J6 riot. We have the Chaperone here to enlighten us and to the tragic Colorado mass shooting that happened just a couple days ago. And we begin.
Big news of the day is another horrific mass shooting, this time in Colorado, where 10 people were killed at a Colorado supermarket. According to the Associated Press, a shooting at a Colorado supermarket killed 10 people on Monday, including a police officer who was the first to respond to the scene, according to authorities. Police arrested a suspect. They didn't reveal his name or any details about the shooting at an evening news conference where Boulder Police Chief Maris Harold fought back tears. Investigators had just begun sorting through evidence and witness interviews and didn't have details on a motive for the shooting at the King Soopers store in Boulder, which is about 25 miles northwest of Denver, home to the University of Colorado, according to Boulder County District Attorney Michael Doherty. He said, "This is a tragedy and a nightmare for Boulder County. These were people going about their day, doing their shopping. I promise the victims and the people of the state of Colorado we will secure justice." The attack was, according to the Associated Press, the 7th mass killing this year in the United States, following the March 16th shooting that left 8 people dead at 3 Atlanta area massage businesses, according to a database compiled by the Associated Press, USA Today, and Northwestern University. And of course, it all depends on how you define.
I wanted to just end it right there because if Ben Shapiro was anything about objective news, he actually would have just stopped right there. But here we go. His hands are on the wheel. It's time to steer.
Mass shooting, because some definitions are like 3 people or more. Some definitions are 5 people or more. It follows a lull in mass killings during the pandemic in 2020, which had the smallest number of such attacks in more than a decade, which is mainly because people were locked inside their houses, so people couldn't congregate, which meant it was more difficult to pull off a mass shooting. This database tracks mass killings and defined as 4 or more dead, not including the shooter. One of the reasons, by the way, that a lot of these statistical databases like to separate off mass shootings with 4 or more dead is because if they include 3 or more dead, then the numbers rise dramatically and the racial composition of the shooters goes dramatically differently. Because it turns out there are a lot of gangland shootings that involve people who are killing 2, 3 people. And so the numbers change pretty radically. You'll notice that mass shootings are always the excuse for gun control, but the deadly violence that happens in Chicago every single weekend, that is never the excuse for gun control. Because again, this plays into the broader media narrative, which is that the big problem in America is white supremacy and America's systems of violence.
Yeah, but doesn't Chicago already have really strict gun laws? I'm not 100% sure. I just think it's very fascinating that he highlights that the reason why we don't do that statistically wise is because we're worried about the demographics being shifted. But that's a very convenient narrative there to paint the Democrats as bad people. Chicago, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled the handgun bans of Chicago and Oak Park to be unconstitutional. On July 12, 2010, a new Chicago City ordinance took effect that allowed the possession of handguns with certain restrictions. Residents were required to obtain a Chicago firearms permit. So it's a very much more complicated story than that, usually as it is. But I guess Chicago had much more stricter gun laws before 2010. Let's see. I think one of the things we don't want to do is This is, and the funny thing is the article that I clicked was about the Las Vegas mass shooter. So we really only have this conversation after the most amount of people are killed. Pointing to Chicago to suggest that gun laws don't work is not a new talking point. Trump claimed Chicago had, quote, the toughest gun laws in the United States, unquote, in a 2016 presidential debate, which is funny now because Ben Shapiro's, flipping Chicago on its head. Chicago is just the example that all politicians go to because of its extremely high homicide rate. Chris Christie likewise pointed to Chicago as a place with high crime despite tight gun laws. The right-wing site Breitbart has on many occasions posted articles with headlines containing the phrase gun-controlled Chicago. Let's see. But while gun violence in Chicago is high, the rest of this common talking point doesn't really hold water. It's also true that there were more than 4,000 shooting victims in Chicago in 2016. It's also true that Chicago has suffered a massive amount of gun crime recently. In 2016, homicides in Chicago sharply rose, mostly as a result of gun homicides. Gun homicides in the city rose by 61% between 2015 and 2016. That helped make the gun homicide rate in Chicago particularly huge compared to other similar cities. The rate was 25.1 per 100,000 residents in 2016, compared to 14.7 in Philadelphia and just 2.3 in New York. It's not true that Chicago has the toughest gun laws in the country, as other fact checkers have repeatedly found. It is true that Illinois has tougher gun laws than many other states. The state is one of the 7 that requires licenses and permits to buy any firearm, and it's one of the 5 that requires waiting periods for buying any firearm. So apparently it does have some certain roadblocks that make getting a legal firearm a little bit more difficult. The Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, which tracks gun laws nationwide, has given the state a B+ for its gun laws. It has some tough gun laws. There is an assault weapons ban in Cook County, for example, but it's not true that Chicago has the strictest. At one point, it did have much tougher laws. The city has also had a gun registry program since 1968, but ended in 2013 when the state passed a law allowing the concealed carry of weapons. So Chicago's literally all over the place, but that doesn't, what we might be ignoring here is whether or not there's a flow of illegal firearms going through this city. Some cities go even beyond that. San Francisco has a safe storage law. State lines don't stop guns. It's important to remember here that Chicago is very close to 2 states that have relatively weak gun laws, and that's what I was wondering. Wisconsin and Indiana. So while it's easy to pick up on Chicago or pick on Chicago or any other high crime city for its ugly statistics, says one expert, taking bordering states into account weakens the gun advocacy talking point. So I do find that a little bit more interesting. All right, so I thought Chicago and Illinois were a little bit more tough. They're not uber strict on it, but there's a good process still going into being licensed and having a permit.
The slain officer was identified as Eric Talley, 51, who'd been with Boulder police since 2010, according to Herald. He went to the store after a call about shots fired, someone carrying a rifle. He was, by all accounts, one of these outstanding officers of the Boulder Police Department. His life was cut too short, Doherty said of Talley. Identities of the other 9 victims were not disclosed Monday night, as police were still notifying their family members. Matthew Kirsch, acting U.S. Attorney for Colorado, pledged the full weight of federal law enforcement to support the investigation. Officers did escort a shirtless man with blood running down his leg out of the store in handcuffs. Authorities would not say if he was, in fact, the suspect. Officials have not said whether the suspect is the person who was taken from the shooting scenes of Foothills Hospital in Boulder, and the hospital is not releasing any more information. Dean Schiller told the AP he had just left the supermarket when he heard gunshots and saw 3 people lying face down, 2 in the parking lot, 1 near the doorway. He said he couldn't tell if they were breathing. There was also video live streamed on YouTube, which showed 1 person on the floor inside the store and 2 more outside on the ground, and you can hear gunshots at the beginning of the video. At one point, authorities said over the loudspeaker the building was surrounded and you need to surrender. Sarah Moonshadow told the Denver Post 2 shots rang out just after she and her son, Nicholas Edwards, finished buying strawberries. She said she told her son to get down, and then we just ran. It's obviously just another horrific mass shooting. And the media typically in these situations responds by suggesting, of course, that people who don't agree with their basic policy prescriptions are somehow unsympathetic to the victims in these sorts of situations.
I think the stonewalling comes off as sympathetic, especially with what Ted Cruz says. Ted Cruz had some really primo comments. It might take me a second to get there, but I think it's more of the conversation itself that's having a deeper issue of whether or not we really care enough to do something about all these mass shootings. But I think it's very interesting here that Ben Shapiro takes the position of appearing to do the opposite of what the media is doing, which is, using events as pretext for things. And he's still a narrative driver in the same way that a lot of other media are. It's just it doesn't agree with the conservative bias, so he has to make sure that that steering wheel goes both left and then back right, so that people get their talking point and rhetorics correct. I don't remember if I saved that Ted Cruz video, but Ted Cruz had a horrible response to the whole situation. Let me see. I'm not finding it. Maybe I did not save it at all. It's very likely I didn't save it, but I can try to go somewhere else to find it. Here it is. Oh, there it is.
Time there's a shooting, we play this ridiculous theater where this committee gets together and proposes a bunch of laws that would do nothing to stop these murders. Senator from Connecticut just said the folks on the other side of the aisle have no solutions. Well, the senator from Connecticut knows that is false. And he knows that's false because Senator Grassley and I together introduced legislation, Grassley-Cruz, targeted at violent criminals, targeted at felons, targeted at fugitives, targeted at those with...
That's the thing, though, is that I'm pretty sure both recent shootings weren't done by criminals until they actually killed those people. As far as I know, were fairly clean in their records. So targeting criminals before trying to figure out how do we keep guns out of the hands of specific individuals who may or may not have neurological situations going on, whether it's neurodivergent or something that's a little bit more tied to the psychology of their culture, it doesn't really help to focus in on a new criminal reform bill in the time of a mass shooting. So Ted Cruz sounding like he's doing something when really that's missing the mark.
Serious mental disease.
Oh.
To stop them from getting firearms, to put them in prison when they try to illegally buy guns.
When they try to illegally buy guns. That's another like little bit of word jumping jacks there, or gymnastics, because what is it like? We have red flag laws in certain states, and so it's kind of even up to people to report on whether or not somebody has a red flag situation to where their gun must then be confiscated. So yeah, he's really missing the mark. Ted Cruz really be missing the mark here by focusing on like a criminal justice reform bill and punishing criminals for illegally obtaining weapons, when that's not necessarily what the issue is here.
What happens in this committee after every mass shooting is Democrats propose taking away guns from law-abiding citizens because that's their political objective.
And it may or may not be. The thing is, though, is that I don't really agree with the liberals' policy of taking everybody's guns away. For one, it's going to be nearly impossible with the 300 million guns that are out in our streets already. And the other thing is just, yeah, the 300 million guns that are out there aren't all going to come back, and it's going to create a bigger stir in the United States than we might be able to handle. So gun confiscation is not really going to work. But the Republicans keep painting the argument of having stronger regulations in obtaining a firearm as the same thing as taking away your guns.
But what they propose, not only does it not reduce crime, it makes it worse. And
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing too, is that like criminals really don't care about breaking laws. And so if they're going to obtain a gun, you know, to commit a crime, their first crime is probably going to be getting a gun. So it's hard to make the case that you need to confiscate everybody's guns on the basis of criminals can obtain them, when you're taking them away from law-abiding citizens who also have such a strong belief in the Second Amendment that says that I need my guns to protect me from a tyrannical government. And, you know, by saying too, we need to confiscate all the guns to keep you safe from criminals, it's also like another like sly or maybe even unintended way of saying that most of your citizens are suspects until proven innocent. So that's another deeper issue in this whole conversation. But yeah, Ted Cruz not coming in sounding like he really cares about those affected by the mass shooting.
Because you know that the next political move here, forever and always, will be a federal call for gun control. Joe Biden has been looking for an excuse to push gun control for a little while here now. He's been talking about gun control consistently for the last 10, 15 years. He used to be.
And I mean, this is like one of those political issues that really gets militias fired up. Like the whole "Don't Tread on Me" movement and everything like that. This is really getting them fired up.
He's somebody who's a little looser on gun control. Now he is somebody who's much tighter on gun control. He's been pushing for an assault weapons ban, a la the 1994 assault weapons ban that really had no impact on mass shootings in the United States. He's been looking for that
Obviously
for quite a while. So this will be used politically as a hook in order to push forward the gun control agenda. And the media are going to foster this by suggesting, of course, that if you don't agree with Joe Biden's agenda, it's because you don't care about the people who were killed. It's a cheap political trick that is played during every tragedy.
I mean, I don't agree that if you don't like Biden's policies about it, because I personally don't really like the steps that are going to be taken by Biden's administration or establishment Democrats, because I don't really think it's actually going to solve the problem of Americans killing fellow Americans in mass numbers. What I'm more concerned about is that Republicans really don't want to do anything about it. They like the whole issue is a non-issue for them, and yet we talk about with Ted Cruz wanting a stronger criminal bill, and then we hear from other people that, like, you know, we have to reform our voting laws because it's easier for somebody to commit voter fraud than it is to buy a gun. And this is just like nonsense conversation going around this from the, like, especially from the right wing. And it's not even like, it's not as absolutist as a lot of liberals get, where it's like we have to get rid of all guns, but in a lot of ways it then does reach to that point of absolutism where everybody should just have a gun. So it's a broken conversation in this country, and I think it might drive a civil war even harder than race issues.
That if you don't agree with my policy prescription, it's because you don't care about the people who have died or the people who've been victimized in any particular way. And you can see the media already ramping up for this, right? That if you say that the gun control measures that are likely to be pushed by the federal government are extraordinarily unlikely to prevent mass shootings. In fact, virtually every gun control policy that's been pushed by the federal government has had no impact on mass shootings. The number of guns in circulation in the United States has risen dramatically over the course of the last 15 to 20 years. The number of people who have been killed in mass shootings year on year has actually been going down. But that does not matter to the folks who push gun control. And so
I don't think that's true either. That, I'm pretty sure that was a fabrication, because in the 90s it was far less, but since like 2011 we had a mass shooting. What was the statistic? It was like a mass shooting every 54 days. So, I mean, that's where we're at right now, and I'm pretty sure that was a sharp increase from the 90s. I guess I would have to fact check Ben Shapiro on that.
their idea is you are unsympathetic to victims. This has been a thing ever since I told Piers Morgan not to do it on CNN. The reality is that you can be deeply sympathetic to people who have been harmed in any sort of crime and still recognize that bad policy does not solve the problem. Okay, but you can.
Yeah, bad policy does not solve the problem. The problem really is, though, is that you can come off unsympathetic when you're not willing to have the conversation because you think that having a gun is like intrinsic to your human right. Like the same thing as having the right to life is the same thing as having your gun. And it's really not. The only reason why you need guns is because other people have guns and they're shady as fuck. So if we had less shady people, we probably wouldn't need guns. And if we could cooperate together, there would be no reason to solve diplomatic issues through violence. But that's not where we're at. We're a warlike people. I mean, even in 2019, it says there were more mass shootings across the U.S. in 2019 than there were days in the year. So, like, I don't know where Ben Shapiro got this statistic where, you know, they've been going down. Because I've been hearing the opposite. It went down during 2020, which he acknowledged because there was lockdowns and stuff like that. So he knows that 2020 it went down, but year over year, I don't think so, man. I think it's on the opposite end of that. In 2019 had the highest number of mass shootings in any year since 2014, when the Gun Violence Archive started its count. And it didn't start counting till 2014. Oh my God. Ugh. Anyways, it has surpassed the prior record of 382 mass shootings in 2016. The GVA Gun Violence Archive reported 346 mass shootings in 2017 and 337 in 2018. Yeah, going down when we have over 300 per year. Okay, yeah, it's not a problem, is it, Ben?
You can see the media already setting the predicate. So here on CNN was one of the reporters saying that this is just the way America is. This is just, it's unique to America. This is how America is now. Realistically speaking, America does have more absolute numbers of mass shootings than other countries. But there are mass shootings in Australia. There have been mass shootings in Norway. If you were to look at the number of deaths per million from mass shootings, it's actually higher in some civilized countries than it is in the United States.
Such as, like, provide some work, because we have over 300. Sometimes we have more mass shootings than there are days of the year. So I would be genuinely interested if he could provide some work as to who's trying to compete for number one of mass shootings.
United States. Nonetheless, again, the predicate here is that America is unique, that this problem is easily solved by a simple policy change, which of course it is not. And the media...
I mean, the one way that I see that the United States is unique is especially when, like, people from the UK or Europe comment on this, is that they're like, well, we don't really have guns as much as you guys, and I'm always perplexed on your necessity and need for a gun. They honestly look at American culture and our gun fetish as something extremely weird.
Are going to suggest that if you oppose that policy change, it's because you don't care about what just happened in Boulder, Colorado. Here was CNN jumping on that within.
And again, I'm going to make my position clear. It's not that you oppose Biden's. That's fine. You can impose legislation, but to offer literally nothing in the way of actually moving towards a solution in this specific issue comes off more deaf to the suffrage than just opposing one position. Because if you oppose a position, then at least see if you can amend that policy, that legislation, which is what they do in the House and the Senate, is that they discuss the terms of the bills to make it bipartisan, right? But that's not the conversation they're having right now. Republicans are just coming out as, I'm against whatever you're going to put forward because that's what I ran on and got elected off of.
Probably an hour of the shooting breaking.
A larger story here that may not be addressed today, but is one that we have to address in light of what happened in Atlanta, which is, are we facing a spring and summer of mass casualty events as we come out, as people congregate? And that is something that the Biden White House will have to address as well.
Juliette, how can that be? How can it be that after a year of basic quarantine in the country, the first thing we do as Americans is go back to mass shootings? I mean, how can that be?
Okay, so again, the level of incredulity, I believe it's Alison Camerata over on CNN, the level of incredulity there, the notion that you are, how can it be that we as Americans aren't doing anything? I didn't shoot anyone today, did you? I didn't engage in a mass shooting. In fact...
Yeah, but what's very fascinating is that when we do something that the United States is proud of, right, we take all that credit. America was the was the bastion of democracy around the world. We've given it to so many third world nations. We've given so much aid. We take credit for the good things that we do. And yet when the darkness creeps out of what America truly is, Ben Shapiro's not willing to associate that with the American society or culture. So it's very fascinating to me that no matter what, if it's negative in the actions of America, let's not say we had anything to do with it. But if it's positive and innovative, then that's just the American way.
As of yesterday, as far as I'm aware, there were some 330 million Americans who didn't engage in a mass shooting. It's not as though everybody went out in the streets and started shooting guns in the air and then turned the guns on their fellow citizens.
Yeah, but how many lone wolves do we have? How many people do we have sitting there with plots and plans, schemes and thoughts of doing these kinds of things? And that's what I think we're always missing in this conversation is we're not talking about the mental health of our citizens. We're not talking about the culture that we perpetuate where people think they have to go to grocery stores, elementary schools, and soft target areas like IHOPs and all of these things where there's less likelihood of people defending themselves, and why somebody would want to bring a gun that can shoot so many rounds and kill them. We're not talking about that. We're always focusing in on how America has a gun control problem because the left wants to take all the guns and the right wants to give all the guns. But we're not having the discussion is what causes an American citizen to kill fellow American citizens. And a lot of it has to deal with people's certain views on the political system. If it's coming from the right wing, it tends to have a lot to do with multiculturalism taking over and eroding American traditions and the overpowered authoritarian government coming to take your guns away. And if it's on the left wing side, it's this fear of authoritarianism and fascism. And it's so strange to me. Because yeah, I don't know how either side is going to have a revolution without killing innocent people. I really don't, and it's very unfortunate, and it's dumb, and politics is stupid, and it fucks up everybody's lives rather than doing what it should do. And here we are, fucking them up some more.
There are 300 million guns in the United States. There are over 100 million long guns in the United States. Okay, virtually none of them were used in a mass shooting yesterday. But there was one used by somebody who was evil. We don't know his name yet. We don't know his motive yet.
Yeah, we don't know his motive yet, but long guns have been used before. Various guns have been used in mass shootings, Ben. Where, like, he's also pretending like things happen in a vacuum. Like, as if this one event is an isolated event in American society. When if we actually put it on a timeline, we can create a history of mass shootings. Not even that, we can create a history of domestic terrorist attacks. Jesus.
Okay, so we have no insight into why this. We have no insight into how the gun was obtained. We just don't have any information as of yet. That has not stopped the media from immediately setting the emotional groundwork for a gun control push. And again, the emotional groundwork is that this is the norm in America. This is what's regular, and most Americans are fine with it. Most Americans just turn a blind eye. Casey Hunt at NBC.
We've made jokes before COVID lockdown everything about how normalized shootings are. Even South Park made a joke about it where they would begin every episode with gunshots at the school and then it would just pan away because it's not something that goes away. It's something that continually happens. We became so desensitized. Nobody even got that mad at South Park for doing it. It's like, Ben, this is normal America to have mass shootings. Like, we're actually getting back to normal now that the mass shootings are back. We're seriously ignoring our own the American psychology by saying this is an abnormal event in America and that this one has its own specific uniqueness to it when really most of them don't.
News pushing the same sort of idea. She's the Capitol Hill correspondent. She tweeted out, "We're all emotionally exhausted after the last year. We've lost so much and so many, but I refuse to let exhaustion help normalize 10 people getting shot and killed as they go about their daily lives for any or no reason. We have a moral imperative to be better than this." I don't even know what that last part means. A moral imperative to be better than what? Nobody is saying that what happened in Colorado is decent, good, or should be something that we ignore. Who is saying that? Better than what? Did you engage in a mass shooting yesterday? I didn't. This notion that all Americans are
America engaged in a mass shooting. And I feel like that's what would make a broader connection to this, is if we felt connected to the events that happen in America by Americans. But like I said, Ben Shapiro will highlight and give Trump all the credit for the vaccines when it came from publicly funded money research and specific scientists who spent, countless days. And also, we wouldn't have gotten the blueprint of the protein RNA unless it was from the Chinese scientists and doctors who sent that around the globe. So Trump gets all the credit, even though he had the smallest amount of doing anything about it. But it's just the same thing over and over again. Take all the credit for the good shit, and then blame somebody else for anything that comes out of our culture negatively. It's amazing.
Somehow okay or blasé about 10 fellow Americans being shot to death in a supermarket, including a police officer, and somehow they're blasé about that. That we can't just go back to our normal. I don't believe that Casey Hunt is more sympathetic than you are, or than I am. I don't believe that Casey Hunt is a deeper wellspring of emotion than you are, or than other normal Americans are. I think all Americans are rightly outraged at the act of evil that we saw yesterday in Boulder, Colorado. But again, the media are setting the groundwork, and the groundwork is that when Joe Biden comes out and makes an emotional pitch for gun control, if you don't believe that gun control is truly well calibrated toward reducing risk and preserving rights, then this means that you just don't care, right? You're not better than this, in the words of Casey Hunt, right? You shouldn't normalize that. Nobody's normalizing anything. But this is.
She's not talking about the gun control though, and he's reframing it as if she's merely talking about the reaction to these events every single time.
The same game that our media play, and it really is kind of an emotionally manipulative game. That if you don't agree with what they want, it means you're a bad person. That is the subtle argument that is being made here. It's not a particularly subtle argument in reality. Some people are less subtle even than that. Mary L. Trump, who is famous only because her last name is Trump and has made $1 bajillion off of writing a book about how much she doesn't like Donald Trump. So Mary L. Trump tweeted out, "The NRA is a terrorist organization and should be treated as such." Do we have any evidence that this particular person was an NRA member, or that the NRA fostered his behavior, or that the NRA trained him for this behavior?
The NRA has basically lobbied against any kind of sensible gun reform. I wouldn't agree with the, equating them to terrorists, but I would certainly acknowledge that they have stifled any sensible gun conversation or gun reform in this country through their lobbying. And they're mostly made up of gun manufacturers that sell propaganda into the idea of owning your gun and protecting your Second Amendment. So they are, in a way, accountable to where we're at right now as far as our gun laws go. So I don't agree that they're terrorists, but I do think that they're a bit of a problem.
Behavior. And by the way, what exactly is that suggestion? If the NRA is a terrorist organization, then presumably we should round up all the members and put them in Gitmo. If the NRA is a terrorist organization, what, we're going to go around? Does Joe Biden now have the capacity to just drone American citizens who happen to believe in the Second Amendment?
Under the Patriot Act, I think he technically can. And, if he marks any group as a terrorist organization and they pose a deep enough threat, I think the president can legally drone strike them. I'm not saying that it's going to lead to good consequences afterwards, but legally speaking, if he marks the head of NRA as a terrorist and provides evidence that they were trying to attack American citizens, then yeah, he could probably drone strike them. Yeah.
So little of this is rooted in anything remotely resembling a policy debate.
So is this whole conversation, Ben. You spent so much time talking about if you don't agree with their legislation, you're marked as unempathetic, but look at how much I care because I care so much. I care about your Second Amendment right. What do you have to propose that would actually be a solution to the situation rather than talking about how empathetic we should all think you are?
If you want to make a case for specific pieces of legislation that would mitigate mass shootings or shootings at all, while actually preserving Americans' fundamental right to defend themselves and defend their property and defend their rights, then bring it forth. But this is the big problem. And Barack Obama used to admit this all the time. He used to say, sure, legislation we're now bringing forward on gun control wouldn't have stopped this shooting, but it might stop other shootings. Might. Okay, well, if it wouldn't stop this shooting, then why are you talking about this piece of legislation, on the back of this particular act of evil. They recognize the game before it's being played, because I promise you this is going to be the narrative over the course of the next couple of weeks as Joe Biden immediately shifts into gun control mode. He's immediately going to shift into gun control mode. The media are going to shift along with him because they don't want to talk about what's happening on the border, because that, of course, is a Biden-fostered crisis. And so they're immediately going to shift with Joe Biden into gun control talk. And the implication is going to be those evil obstructionist Republicans, if only they would just go along with the gun control agenda, then all of this would stop. And if they don't go along with it, it's because they wish to normalize, in the words of Casey Hunt, what just happened in Colorado. Again, no one is normalizing acts of evil. That is not something that any fellow American is doing. And if you're imputing to fellow Americans that they literally don't care about people getting shot in a supermarket in Colorado, we shouldn't share the same country. If you truly believe that your fellow Americans do not care about innocents being gunned down in a supermarket, then you're...
How can you not care when you're not willing to take the accountability of the type of people that American culture pushes out that kill fellow American citizens? But you'll take the credit for the innovation of the General Motors and the innovation of all the weapons manufacturers and the innovation of democracy. You'll take all the credit of the positivity, but you won't take any accountability of the negativity or responsibility or even felt connection to the broader society that keeps churning out these events and people. Like that's where the unempathy is coming from, Ben, is the fact that you're removing yourself from the fact that this is America. She's saying we shouldn't normalize this, but it's already too late. It's been happening for a while now, and we only talk about 5 or 6 every time it hits the national news, when there's hundreds happening per year. So it is extremely normal already, Ben, and you're just ignoring it because you want to fire people up into the idea of a tyrannical government coming for your firearms. And that's enough to get fuel on the fire of a really gross right-wing revolution.
Living next to people who are evil, and you shouldn't be sharing a town with them. You shouldn't be sharing a church with them. You shouldn't be sharing a country with them. But that is the underlying emotional play that is being made here by your delightful mainstream media. I hope you enjoy.
That may or may not be true, because the mainstream media does have its own agenda as well. It's the biggest machine of manufactured consent. But, you know, it's pretty obvious, too, that the right-wing talking heads don't also want to be able to find a middle ground so that people can keep their guns and keep them responsibly. We're just going to assume right now that all gun owners are the responsible kind, and there's no reason to actually reform anything. So it's great. That's why you sound empathetic, is because you don't actually think there's a broader issue going on with our society and our culture, which is even funnier too, because they're so worried about culture war issues. Like, they'll talk hours and hours and days about Cardi B's WAP, but then when it comes to why do we keep having American mass shooters, it's not a cultural problem. It's so strange. It's so strange. But to wrap this up with the worst show on earth, Louder with Crowder. I hate this. I hate this political issue. It's so bad. It's so bad.
A new scientific climate study is claiming that pollution is now causing men to have smaller penises. It's true.
Really?
I knew it.
Just ask Gerald.
Well, let's stop this then.
Speaking of small penises, Stephen Colbert.
All right. Cool. So we there's an actual reason for most men to start caring about pollution and climate change, with the article that Steven Crowder begins with, which is that it's making men's penises smaller, which you would think would concern a lot of males and bring out, you know, concerns for their future kin. But rather than diving in that deeper and how pollution and climate change is pretty a pertinent issue, both globally and personally, he uses it just to dunk on Stephen Colbert. This is good faith radio show hosting to its maximum. Love it.
Doesn't understand gun laws at all.
Republicans on the Hill know the majority voters want some form of gun control. So they immediately tried to change the subject.
What has happened
What
in the
about
last few
one of the
days,
many
what's
forms we
happened
have?
in the last
Stephen
years
Colbert?
is, of course, tragic. And I'm not trying to perfectly equate these two, but We have a lot of drunk drivers in America that kill a lot of people. We ought to try to combat that too.
Okay, I'll take that deal. Let's regulate guns the way we regulate alcohol and cars. You got to be 21, you got to pass a test to get a license, you got to have registration and insurance for your gun. If you move to a new state, you got to do the whole damn thing over again, and you can't go out loaded.
Well, it's interesting that you would take that deal, Mr. Colbert, because the deal already exists. Right now, you do have to be 21 to purchase a handgun. That's federal law. You have to be 18 in most states to purchase a long rifle. Some states you have.
Yeah, but you notice the inconsistency there, Crowder, is that in some states you can be 18 to get a long rifle, which is still a gun. So why would we not have consistent ages for no matter what type of gun it is?
To be 21 for concealed carry, you do have to pass a test. You do need an ID for a background check.
Yep. Yeah, you need to pass a test for concealed carry. What about passing a test for owning a rifle at all? Or not even just a rifle, any gun whatsoever, which other nations require.
And if you do,
which some states do as well, but it's not a federally mandated law, so you can go to another state, get a gun very easily compared to other states, and go home. Like, it's so crazy to me. Like, that's the reason of a federal gun reform, is to have very much consistency that doesn't allow states to defy these things and make it more difficult on, say, Illinois, who has strict gun laws, but their neighboring states have weaker ones. So there's an incentive to go out of state, get a gun there, and go back home.
Change states, you usually have to update it, none of which, by the way, are required for voting. But the good news is that the squad wants to change the voting age to 16.
Oh, that's great.
So I tell you what, I will take...
I like how he blames the squad, even though it was a part of like a whole broader reform or voter reform bill or election reform. And he's also lying, because it's not lowering the age from 18 to 16. It's actually allowing 16-year-olds to register to vote if by the time the election comes around, they turn 18, so that there's no use of actually registering at that time. You can become a registered voter beforehand. Doesn't mean your vote's going to necessarily count, though, but let's just lie about it anyways, because that's the kind of conversation we need to have in our country, is lies. We need more lies. There's too much.
Take the deal that just the current laws in the books for guns, okay, apply to voting. How about that? How about that? You need an ID? You need a vote? Wait, right, vote? We just need an identification check? We need to make sure that you're not a convicted felon?
Yeah, and that's amazing, is that like all of that is easy as heck. Like all of that is really easy. It should not be as easy to vote as it is to get a gun, which in my state it is, because I was, it took me like 30 minutes to find my gun, and then it took me about 20 minutes to do the background check, and then about 5 minutes to get a case for it, and then 2 minutes to walk out with my gun. So overall, 20-minute background check just to make sure I was eligible to own that gun. Very fascinating to me that's the same line of voter registration, except I could do it from home. You know what I'm saying? I can register to vote from home online and verify my identity through that way. So it's very funny to me that Crowder thinks he's making it sound like it's going to become more stricter into the same guidelines of something that's pretty restrictive, when he's been arguing for the fact that registering to vote is way too easy and allows too much fraud to happen. So why would you make that argument if for all this time you've been saying that registering to vote as it is now has created so much room for fraud? Why would you want to move those laws into guns now? That's a horrible argument to make. If any of his listeners are actually consistent to hearing what he believes on certain issues, you would know that that is a terrible position to take.
That's racism. You need to update it when you move to a new state. Oh, that's going to disenfranchise all the votes we need to buy. Okay.
All right. You also don't have to be 21 to drive.
It's true.
I just want to point that out.
You don't.
He was inaccurate.
And you know what else I would take? Look, as an earmark to that bill, do universal.
Yeah, but that's because you don't have to be 21 to vote or not vote. Sorry, 21 to vote or 21 to work. Usually, a lot of people who get driver's license are around the same age that they can start working. Look at that link.
Universal mail-in heaters. Everyone automatically
write
gets a
into that.
next day GAT. How about that? This is just, there's no accountability. They obviously say white shooter, right? That's what they went with, and now they've pivoted in record time.
To not mentioning
I mean,
it at
they're
all.
a merry-go-round
mystery.
that's short-circuited, right?
But if you've noticed, they're still saying that it's a white shooter because they're like, well, he's white enough.
You're Nostradamus
close.
because on yesterday's show, and I was like, "Ooh,
Yeah.
Dave, careful," because we can never actually speculate on this show because we'll actually get fact checked. And we're like, "This is just my opinion." People go, "Oh, that's not true." It is true. That's my opinion. But Dave said that guy looks to me Middle Eastern. Remember early on in the show, and I was like, "Dave, careful! I don't want to lose my show because of you." And you were right.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know how to call them.
Spot my Middle Eastern men.
It's just good that I used the word I used, Middle Eastern,
Yes.
and not what I wanted to blurt out. I'm kidding.
I have
It
no
ain't.
idea what you're talking about, Mr. Bibb.
Like I said, my nana was Middle Eastern.
All right. Yep. And that's what they have to talk about sensible gun reform. That was the entire segment. That was it. Are you more informed than you ever were before? You can thank Crowder and his goons for that. What's very fascinating to me too is that watching Twitter is that everybody like the liberal side was like, "Ah, white supremacy at it again," and then it did come out that he was Muslim, and the left, not the left, I'm not even 100% sure, but the liberals that I was watching went silent on the matter. And then it became really funny to me because a lot of people were then pointing out that like Crowder just did, like, "Oh, you just pointed out a Muslim as a white man," and it made me kind of giggle, is because then like your ideology is the line, or not your ideology, but your religion is the line of where your whiteness can begin and end. It's like, "Oh, you look like you come from the the European side of the world. Oh, which god do you worship? Oh, it's Allah. Oh, this is a whites only, kind of gun convention right here. So we're gonna need you to take your brown Allah and get out of here." I thought that was because I watched like a little bit of the right wing Twitter, and it seemed very obvious to me that as soon as you become Islam, that you're no longer white. So that was interesting to me, but even more so, in which hasn't been consistent in any of these. I saw it trending that everybody's saying that he was an ISIS sympathizer, and in the same way that like immediately after a white person goes throughout shooting, everybody blames white supremacy on the liberal and left-wing side. In the same vein, the right wing goes about blaming Islam for a Muslim shooter. So like both parties are completely guilty of blaming thoughts, abstractions, and social constructs as being the sole motivator for somebody's acts of going and doing this. But what the corresponding thing that I see happening in most of these is that it's in the United States. And so I think we need to go from that route of being an American before looking at their specific ideologies and figuring out what their beliefs then led them to, because I think it's a broader American culture issue that we're looking at here and also ignoring at the same damn time. But that is Tox News. That's it. Follow me on Twitter at ToxinPod, ToxnPod. Like if you liked it, dislike if you don't, subscribe, write a review, share, exist through unconditional love in an absolute presence of we can make things better. I have been your host, some guy with a mic, and I will see you next time.